But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. What does that mean? To be called by your name by God. Each of you, not just by a name, your name. I'm Stephen Blackwood, and it's an enormous honor for me to be here to think with you for a few minutes about why we're here. I was born into a big family, so the purpose of this pilgrimage as a kind of regeneration or encouragement to families touches me very deeply. My parents played and do play, huge role in the formation of who I am and how I became what I am, as did my brothers and sisters. I've got 7 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters, and being in the midst of that big family was the most defining feature of my life. And it was in that family that I encountered truth and beauty, nature, music, and above all, what it means to live with these other amazing creatures we call human beings. So, what are we doing here? On this big field in the middle of Oklahoma. What are we doing here? Well, clearly we're building something in a way. 14, a few dads and their sons 5 years ago. Now there's almost 3,000 of us gathered here. What are we doing in this field? Well, I want to start off by saying one thing very clearly. Here tonight, we are in communion. We are in continuity with the prophets and apostles, the monks and martyrs, the builders and the intellects, the mothers and fathers, the painters and the poets, and all the saints and all the sinners who have ever lived. They are here with us now. All of them are present to us, carrying us along, handing us our inheritance. As it were a flame they are giving us to take up here and now on this pilgrimage. Now, pilgrimage. What is a pilgrimage? What does that word even mean? A pilgrim or a pilgrimage? Well, the history of that word is actually very interesting. It goes back through English to medieval French and then to late and early Latin, where you find 2 words, per agros, to go through, we say this still sometimes today, perambulate and so on. To go through, on the one hand, and agros, where we get the word agriculture, through the fields. So it means to go through the fields. It's from that we get later the word peregrinos. Peregrinos, and you can see then pellegrinos, pilgrim. So you get from the peragros to the pilgrim that we all are today. What does it mean to go through the fields? Well, we're all on our way to the Abbey. Well, what is the Abbey? The Abbey is a sacred space. It's a place of God, of what is highest and best, of truth and beauty. So you might say that one thing a pilgrimage is an orientation of ourselves to that Abbey and to all it represents. And so it's a re-aiming or an orientation, like you string an arrow on a bow and you point it. We're orienting or pointing ourselves towards that. It's a journey that can be understood in many different ways. In some sense, a pilgrimage is a journey to freedom, perhaps a longing to be free from sadness or depression, from betrayal or being lost or angry or alone. Perhaps it's a longing for realization. One of my favorite images in all of literature comes from the poet Homer, who wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad, books some of you may know. There's a beautiful image of the hero Odysseus. He's living on an island with a goddess. This is perhaps not quite a Christian image. He's living on an island with a goddess, and you'd think that sounds pretty good. He's going to live there forever. He's got all he needs to eat and drink. And, I've been to Greece. It's pretty nice on those islands in the summer, probably a nice swim in the morning. And yet, one of the most beautiful images in all of literature is this hero Odysseus is weeping into these eternal garments because he sees a wisp of smoke from the island where his home is. And he's filled with a longing for home. Maybe that's one of the images we can begin our pilgrimage with, and that is to say, with a longing for home. I want to reflect with you for a few minutes about what that home is. Because here we are orienting ourselves to, let's call it, to God, to what's highest and best, most beautiful and true and redemptive, our true home, let's say. But why don't we just drive there? I mean, we could just, get in the car and we could probably be there in about a half an hour. Why are we going to take 2.5 days and sleep in the ground and walk there? I mean, we could just drive. Why are we going to walk there? And I guess I want to suggest to you that we kind of all know why we need to walk. Because it's just not that easy to get to what is highest and best. We wouldn't be here if it were just always there, obvious. It takes a journey, a struggle, you might say, to bring together our day-to-day reality, whether it's washing the dishes or going to school or visiting people in the hospital, and the realm of what is highest and best, our true home. How does time and eternity, how do those come together? Heaven, what we might call the heavenly Jerusalem in the Bible, it's always there. But why doesn't it always feel close to us? That's why we're walking. I want to read you a poem by the poet Christopher Snook, which gets at this, let's say, fundamental tension of the spiritual life, of feast and famine, of life and death, of consolation and desolation, of suffering and joy, of difficulty and beauty. I want to suggest to you that the Christian religion is about mediating or bringing those things together, showing how one is in the other, how God is in man, how the eternal is in the temporal. This is a poem called Everything Wakes Up by the poet Christopher Snook. There is a grave conspiracy between sleep and death, those little deaths each night that we call slumber, and those long sleeps at the end of days that we call death. So when she asked if the black dragonfly on the edge of the civic fountain was dead or only sleeping, in much the same way she might have asked if the waving man were drowning or the drowning man only waving, I could only recall this from years of sleep-like death overtaking me each night and death-like sleep claiming those I love. I could recall only this from the stillborn child at dawn and the vigil at bedsides and the quick, violent deaths and the slow, painful losses. I could recall only this when together we looked at the dragonfly, dark against the edge of the fountain, and she asked, still a child, is it dead or only sleeping? I recalled only this: everything wakes up. So as we think for a few minutes about how time and eternity come together, how what we are aiming for at Clear Creek comes together with each step we take over these fields, I want to suggest that radical action is necessary. That's why we're here. We've had to leave the world, in a sense, in order to enter it more deeply. Not to leave our trials and our tribulations and our real lives behind, but to go into them, through them, more deeply. For 35 miles, step by step. So, a few, let's call them general setting, tone setting thoughts. The first is, this pilgrimage is a kind of a liturgy. Now, I know maybe you're not used to using the word liturgy except in church, but you know, what is a liturgy? It's a pattern that repeats. There's different stages and steps to what a liturgy is, and because of those changes, those markers, you're able to find yourself in it. This is the 5th time this pilgrimage has happened. This liturgy of the pilgrimage. And we're already into it. We've had a welcome and now a talk, and we're going to have we've broken bread together, and we'll have our first night bedding down in the fields, and then our first day of walking, and then our second night, and then our second day of walking, and then a joyous mass. So I want to suggest to you that in the pattern of that pilgrimage that we're all going to enter into together, there's something of a larger pattern that we are stepping into a cosmic story. You might say we're walking in community with all those who have made pilgrimages before, all those who have lived before, all those who have journeyed before us. Indeed, in the biggest and truest sense, we're entering into the pilgrimage that is the life of God, the self-emptying and return that is the activity of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. But there we go. It's hard to talk about pilgrimage without talking about God. And why is that? Well, I'm going to tell you another little story from another one of my favorite books, another poem. The comedy, it's called, the Divine Comedy of a medieval man, a man who lived about 700 years ago, called Dante. And he writes a story of a man on a pilgrimage. And he's trying to climb up this beautiful mountain. And it starts, and the book is like, well, there it is. Just go climb up it. Just there you go. And he can't get to climb up because he's prevented by these beasts, a leopard, a lion, and a wolf. And these symbolize, you might say, his sins or failings or tribulations in various ways. We won't get into the details. But the fact is, it turns out not to be so easy. In fact, it turns out to be impossible. In some sense, the pilgrimage is impossible. That's why we're on the pilgrimage, precisely because of the impossibility of navigating our way on our own to what we most seek, to our homeland, to what is highest and best. And I know this isn't the way that, the world talks. We're living in a time of, I don't know, how can we put it? It changes, but, the world's values are always what they are. Whether it's wealth and power, whether it's riches or fame. The fact of the matter is that while all those things may be good in themselves, they all pass away. And that you, and the person next to you, and I were made for something more. We're made, we talked about pilgrimage as going across the fields. Well, in the deep sense, we are pilgrims here on earth who are made for heaven. And so we're wayfarers, we're wanderers, we're pilgrims here in this world. But how do we find our true home here? Well, I want to suggest that the answer to that question is not simply by our own efforts. That pilgrimage is not possible simply within our own selves. And what I'd like to share with you are a few thoughts about how the pilgrimage is possible. How we can together find our way home. Now, I think in this company, it's not true at anywhere you might give a talk on a Thursday night in a field, but I think this company here, those assembled, probably know the story of David and Goliath, in which the great warrior Goliath is challenging the Israelites. And he's a terrifying man. He's so towering, strong, and powerful. No, everyone is shaking in their boots, afraid to face him. And David, the shepherd boy, comes along and says, what's going on here? He says, I'll go and fight Goliath. But, there's something really amazing in this story that happens. And that is that, the king gives David his armor because he thinks, chances aren't very good it's going to go well for you. I mean, you're David and this is Goliath. I mean, in any worldly terms of power, prestige, this is a, if you were a bookmaker, if you were guessing the odds on who was going to win this game, you'd be hard pressed to vote for David, this teenage boy. And so the king puts his armor on him, and David says, I can't wear this. He says this is not what this battle is about. And he takes his staff in his hand, David does, and he goes down to the brook, to the stream, and he takes out 5 smooth stones. And he puts them in his shepherd bag. And he goes out to face Goliath. And he says, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. David puts his faith in God. There's different ways of thinking about what that means in life. In fact, it takes most of life to think about what that means. It's simple, but it's also difficult. But it means to place yourself in relation to a goodness, to a love that is both in you and beyond you, not of your own making. And so when David takes those 5 smooth stones, that's his entrusting himself to God. Not the spear or the shield or the sword. Those are the measures of worldly battle, let's say. But David is taking these 5 smooth stones. Now, with the time I have left tonight, I want to suggest what some of those stones, you might say the instruments of spiritual battle, might be for each of us. I'm going to give you 3 stones. And maybe as you're walking in these next couple of days, you can pick up a stone or 2 or 3 stones. You can hold them in your hand. You can reflect on these 3 spiritual stones that I want to give you tonight. And the first one is you. You as a spiritual creature. You have a soul. And let me tell you, that soul, it's something you need to think about and care for. The whole premise of a pilgrimage is that you have a soul, that you are a thing, a spiritual being that needs care, that needs to think about what it means to care for. Every single one of you is made to will an infinite and transcendent end. Let me put it to you 2 different ways. I live in the city of Savannah in Georgia, and it's a very beautiful old town, and we have these great big oak trees. They're called live oaks, and every year, it's this time of year, they put off their acorns. And acorns are the seeds of an oak, right? Everyone knows that, and they're just these little things. They're just about this big. And every single one of those acorns is potentially a mighty oak tree that could live for 400 years. Each of its boughs weighing thousands of pounds, outliving any human being. But you know what? Most of those acorns never become oak trees, even though they have the potential to become an oak. Most of them never even end up getting planted in the ground. What does an acorn need to become an oak? Well, it needs to get planted in good soil, and it needs what does it need? It needs sunshine, it needs rain. Maybe it needs a little care here and there, but it needs those things to realize the potential it has in it already. And without that, it can't become the mighty oak tree. And I want to suggest that each of you has a unique potential, but it needs to be cared for. And you need to care for it in yourself. Let me give you another metaphor. A few hundred years ago, there was an Italian man whose last name, at least I think it was his last name, we'll have to check this out later, was Stradivarius. And he made instruments, stringed instruments, violins and violas, things like that. And they are today regarded as the finest instruments ever made. There's a mystery about how, how he made it in the wood and the lacquer, the varnish. It's never really been able to be figured out, so far as I know, what makes each of those instruments the greatest of their kind that can play music in the hands of a master, the likes of which no other instrument can play. I want to suggest, no, I'm just going to outright go and say it. Each of you is a Stradivarius. Each of you is made to play a music that only you can play. You've got to learn what that is. You've got to learn, you've got to give yourself over to that music. You've got to discover what that song is. And so the first stone, the first of the stones from the brook that I want to give you for your pilgrimage is just the exhortation to care for your soul. Through prayer, through withdrawing away from the world, through reading and walking, through music, through recollection, through recreation. What kind of a thing is your soul? What kind of food and nourishment does it need? What kind of habits of life do you need to adopt to care for your soul, to learn to play its music? What kind of disciplines do you need to adopt? Because there's a lot that's going to conspire against you in that battle. To begin with, there's the algorithmically optimized exploitation of your dopaminergic cycles. That's to say, the telephones that we all mostly have in our pockets, or that you will when you're old enough, unless your parents, as I would if I were blessed with children, would not give you such devices. But the point I'm making is that there's a huge amount in our world that will distract you from the spiritual life that only you can live. Whether it's the television or the telephone, whether it's the noise and hustle and bustle of life. And let me tell you, you're going to have to be very, very, very intentional if you're going to resist that. And this is a way in which the pilgrimage that we are called on today in 2024 is different than that which Benedict was on, or that Thomas Aquinas was on, or that St. Paul was on, or that even people who were here 25 years ago were on, because they didn't have in that form the immense challenge of the distraction of the contemporary world. There's always been distraction, and that's not what I'm saying. But I want to draw attention to the fact that these devices are made to prey upon the deepest cycles in our neurology. Let's call it the deepest neurological, or the deepest habits or patterns or powers of your brain. And the only way to resist them is through very deep and careful intention. So there you go. The first stone is to care for your spiritual life. The hairs on your head, the Bible tells us, the hairs on your head are numbered. Who? Me? I mean, maybe someone else's. Maybe someone else could matter that much, that God would know the hairs in their head. No. The hairs on your head are numbered. It is unimaginable what the Lord has prepared for you, in you, and through you. So there is the first stone of prayer, of recollection, of quiet, of withdrawal, of reorientation, of taking time in a quiet room, finding that quiet room in yourself. to let yourself hear the voice of understanding, the voice of wisdom, the voice of forgiveness, the voice of laughter, the voice of love, the voice of God. The second stone I want to give you, the first is your soul. Got that? The second is tradition. The whole tradition. That's the second one. The third one, no, we're going to stay with the second one for a minute here. The word tradition comes from a Latin word named, the Latin word trado. Tradere. That means to hand something over. Like if I were to, hand this over to you and then you hand it on to someone else. You've probably seen, and some of you probably compete in track meets, or you've seen it on TV in the Olympics when people do a relay and they have a baton and they hand it one to the other. That's what a tradition is. And what I want to suggest to you here is the whole tradition, the whole past is there for you. All the habits and practices. The rule of St. Benedict, for example. All the wisdom of the ancients. All the works of literature and philosophy, of theology, from the ancient Greeks to the present. St. Augustine, it's there for you. Boethius, Dante and Aquinas, Jane Austen and Sigrid Undset, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. It's all there for you. All the art and the music. From the monasteries of Subiaco and Monte Cassino, to the cathedrals of Durham and Chartres, to the Abbey of Clear Creek, the poetry of John Donne and George Herbert, Gerard Manley Hopkins and T.S. Eliot, the paintings of Giotto and Fra Angelico and Caravaggio, Dürer and Monet, the music of Hildegard of Bingen and Bach and Handel. I mean, do you know Palestrina's Missa Papi Marcelli, or Talus's Spem Allium, or Bach's Mass in B minor, or Handel's great oratorio Israel in Egypt? All the great hymns of the church, they are yours. Down to the spirituals of this very country, born in this very country through immense suffering. Those great articulations of pilgrimage, of longing for the promised land, that look over the River Jordan. All of that is there for you to feed on, to unfold the potential in your soul, to learn to play the song you are made. You are going to need that in order to learn what you are, in order to light your way. There's all these beautiful flashlights here. The tradition is like a great lantern that you get to carry. And in any situation you're in, it can help you find what your way is. You're going to need that tradition. But you know what? It needs you too. Because what happens in the race when someone's running along with the baton and they've run their race and they've got the baton, how does it get to the person after the person they hand it to? Well, by being handed to the person they hand it to. That's the only way it gets to the next person. And you know what? Each and every one of you are both being handed that baton. From Augustine and Tolkien, from Joan of Arc, from Aristotle, from Jeremiah, from Benedict. They are handing a baton to you right now. But all those countless people in the future, and indeed now in the present, they need you to hand it to them. That's what tradition is. It's handing on, which is why, we say living tradition sometimes. You hear that phrase, living tradition. It's a bit of a redundancy. That means you don't really need the word living if you have tradition. Because if it's being handed on, it's already alive. That's what a tradition is. It's a living handing on, a relay. And so that's how it works, is one to the next handing on. And let's just talk for a minute. Let's give an example. Let's make this real. Here we are in the Benedictine tradition. The monastery of Monte Cassino in Italy was established by Benedict in 529. And that's not May 29th. That was the year 529. 15, almost 100 years ago. But then it was sacked. Sacked means it was, destroyed by the invading Lombards in 570. And then it was reestablished in 718. And then it was sacked by the Saracens in 883. And then it was rebuilt in 949. And then in the Middle Ages, it had its golden age. And then there was an earthquake after, in the midst of those golden ages in 1349. I mean, for goodness sakes, and then an earthquake? And then in 1369, under Pope Urban V, that rebuilding commenced. And then it was sacked by the French revolutionary troops in 1799. And then it was dissolved by the Italian government in 1866. And then it was destroyed by Allied bombing in 1944. And then it was rebuilt again. And there are monks living there even now, right now, today. And this is the paradox of continuity, of tradition, is birth and rebirth. It only works because it's handed down. You are made for that, and there is no tradition outside of us. So I exhort you to go find the things that will help you discover the music that you are born to play, and to drink deeply from them. Something, if you have the chance sometime to go to one of these ancient cathedrals, and you'll see that those steps are worn down by pilgrims who've walked over them. It takes a long time to wear down a piece of stone by walking over it. Hundreds of years. And I want to suggest that, and it's an amazing thing when you get there and you see that step and you think, all the people that step has supported, has upheld, has helped into that door. All the people that step has sustained in their journey, in their pilgrimage. It's amazing. But you know what? Someone made that step. Someone carved that step. There was a stone carver who made that step. That may be you. You know what? That may not be you. That is you. It is up to you to carve those steps, to discover what it means. What are the steps that you are made to carve? So that's the second of the stones. The third, so the first is your soul, and the second is the tradition. The third are relationships with each other. And here again, there's a beautiful asymmetry when you get into what makes a relationship work. It's not the things that the world will tell you. It's spiritual gifts I know a woman, I know a young woman who has a gift, and I just want to give you one example of a kind of spiritual gift that I'm talking about. A woman who has the spiritual gift of encouragement. She can send a text message. You can be down in the dumps, let me tell you. You can think that it is all over. And when you get a text message from this person who has this immense spiritual gift, it lifts you up. She has the gift of lifting others up. Now, you don't hear a lot about that on Instagram or on X or it's not the kind of thing that our world talks about. But I will tell you, it's one of the most powerful, most beautiful and redemptive gifts I have ever seen. The gift of encouragement. It's also gifts of kindness, of forbearance, gifts of love and patience, of wisdom. These are the fruits of the Spirit. I want to read you a line of J.R.R. Tolkien from the Silmarillion, and this is a book. You've probably seen read or seen some of the films of the Lord of the Rings. Well, the backdrop for that whole story is the Silmarillion. It's kind of like the ancient mythology that sets the scene. And I want to give you the first paragraph of the Silmarillion because I think it sets in mythical terms the nature of each one of you sitting next to each of the others here in this field tonight. Here it is. There was Eru, the one, who in Arda, that's the language, is called Ilúvatar. And he made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music, and they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a long while they sang only each alone, or but few together, while the rest hearkened. For each comprehended only that part of the mind of Ilúvatar from which he came. And in the understanding of their brethren they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened, they came to deeper understanding and increased in unison and harmony. So what I want to say here is that you are made to play a music that only you can play, a song. And yet that song is also in relation to other songs. But also you're going to learn what your song is and by hearing from others what their song is. And they will learn what their song is by listening to what yours is. Let me just put it this way. There is no limit to the amazing wonders you can learn from any other human being. This exchange back and forth, this reciprocity, this love of one for the other, this is the essential activity of God himself. And I want to suggest that there is no way through the pilgrimage except with each other. And that there's no way we can go about this life ever. I mean, we can't even come into this world without our mothers giving birth to us. Our presence one to another is fundamental right from the womb. In fact, the womb gives you a good, let's call it, metaphor for what the rest of life is like. Our codependency, the necessity that we carry each other. Let me ask you, is this pilgrimage? Is it going to be easier or harder with others around you? Well, it's almost a nonsensical question, because you'll see each of you carrying and helping each other. We know it is something we can only do together. Say, 20th century martyr Alfred Delp, who writes, "Hunger and thirst and desert journeying and the survival teamwork of mountaineers on a rope. These are the truth of our human condition. We are mountaineers on a rope. We pull one another up, and we make the ascent by prayer and love." You know, we're living in an age that talks a lot about measuring things. Metrics. How much money in the bank. I mean, what's the what are the ways you can put on a paper and a graph? How things work, and there's something useful in that, for sure. But the trouble is, you know, all the most important things they can't be measured like that. I mean, how would you measure, mothers out there? How would you measure your love for your children? Would it be a few cups or yards, or I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't measure love like that. And it's so important that you understand this, that we understand this, because otherwise we will shy from the spiritual life that only you can live. And you will be distracted by the things that the world will tell you are real. I want to suggest to you that, I was talking about carving a stone. That's a helpful metaphor, I think, because, you walk on the step in order to come into the church or into whatever the place may be, and each of you is made to carve something. But I want to suggest that, in fact, this is what our life together is. That your love one to another, that an act of love or kindness or forgiveness is carving a stone that someone else can walk on. It's like opening a door for them. So I want you to leave tonight with a sense that your unique spiritual journey, your pilgrimage, is made possible by others, and you are making theirs possible, then they are making yours possible for you. So these are the 3 stones I want to give you to fight and to wage the battle of the spiritual life. Your own soul, the tradition, and your relationships with others. And they are all inseparable. One is always going to make the others possible, and the other two, you can't take these things apart. You will never understand yourself without the tradition and others. You'll never be able to approach the tradition except through the truth of your own soul, and your relationship with others. You'll never be able to understand and enter into others if you don't know yourself and care and understand yourself and the tradition that has brought us to here now. They are inseparable. You really are a Stradivarius. The tradition as a whole, it is yours, it is in you, and for you to discover and to hand on. And all of your relationships, every single human being you ever encounter, is brimming with God's image, a revelation for you and you to them. I have called you by your name, God says. The music The chords of the cosmos, they reverberate in you. No one, and I mean no one, is like you. No one is, let me put this positively. You are the only person in the whole history of the cosmos who is given to live your life. There is no one in the whole history, past, present, or future, who is given to live your life other than you. And I mean, it just sounds like a truism, well, obviously. But think about that. No one in the whole history of the cosmos is given the talents, the relationships, the challenges, the trials, the fields to walk over that you are given. I'm going to leave you with an image. Talked about the bow and arrow and aiming the arrow. Well, now I want to talk about the bow and the string. You tighten the bow. You tighten the string on the bow so it can carry the tension that will launch the arrow. The bow with its strung string. It's a beautiful image in Homer at the end of the Odyssey where the bow is strung and he clicks, he flicks at the strung bow, and it makes a note, because of course the bow is like a harp. It plays the tension on the string is what enables it to make the sound. So you are made to make a certain music that only you can play. You must let the strings of your soul be strung, and to let them sing. And the only way they can sing is if you let the notes that you are made to play sing loud and clear, quietly and gently. The notes that only you are made, in all of the intricacy and difficulty and particularity of your own life. That is where the greatest music will be found. I encourage you, with everything I've got, to go out and find it. And may the Lord Almighty bless our wayfaring and our walking, step by step and side by side, in the company of each other and of all his saints and angels. Amen.